Hello, everyone. My name is Jess Carrillo, and I'm going to be reacting to an episode of the Stoneybrook podcast. Now, I grew up reading the Babysitter's Club books, and I love them. And like many fans, I sometimes snark at how ridiculous they could be, but they were pretty good books. Some of them obviously needed some tweaking. And getting into the fandom reaction, nostalgic reaction, is a podcast called Stuck in Stoneybrook, which is ran by three women from the Central Valley of California, two of whom are sisters. And their names are, I'm just looking, Emily Crandall, a PhD in political theory, and her persona for this podcast is Dawn Schaefer. And Anne Ichikawa, who's a freelance writer / editor who's written about everything from teen dreams and emo bands to probiotics and beauty potions. And she considers herself like a Claudia Kishi. And Esme Schaller, a PhD in clinical psychology from Stoneybrook University, which exists. She has two middle grade daughters who are currently reading the Babysitter's Club. She considers herself a Christie, and she's a clinical professor of psychiatry. Emily and Esme are sisters who are pretty far apart in age. And yeah, I really love the talks they have. Like, they discuss everything from class privilege to police brutality to feminism to teen psychology, child psychology, and history when discussing each book of the Babysitter's Club. They even discuss some parts of the books that can't help but be aged, like why did Stacy's family decide to move to Stoneybrook, Connecticut, and not, say, Brooklyn? And back in the 80s, when the books were first written, Brooklyn wasn't a gentrification central like it is today. There's also such a thing as called the white flight of to suburbia. So there's a part of that. There's that whole American dream. They even discuss, the Reagan administration. And clearly a lot of adults in Connecticut voted for Reagan in the 1980s. They discuss a huge wealth of things, which I appreciate. My biggest quibble is I feel like their perspective is a bit, you could be a bit, narrow, like, no shade. These are very progressive ladies like myself, but I'm a Latina with parents who immigrated to this country. And Esme and Emily, they're two white women, and Anne's Japanese American. So, it colors that perspective, especially to what got me here. The idea of what makes a strict parent. As many Latinx people know, our parents, our family members were known for being very strict, maybe a bit overbearing and up in your business, but it was always done out of love. And there was, quite frankly, there's also some there's some context, there, like, you move to a new country, you don't know the customs, you're kind of weirded out, you don't know people around you as much, versus, say, in Mexico, where maybe you wouldn't be averse to letting your kids just go over to somebody's house, especially because they're in the same neighborhood and you know them for generations, you know? But you move to a new country and, like, I'm sorry, I'm looking a little pale. Looks better. You move to another country and it's like, you don't know anyone. You don't know what these people are like. You don't know what your new neighbors are like. And, you're also you kind of think like parents and kids seem a bit more cavalier in their behavior than in your culture. There's a lot. Like, there's a lot. Also, from a young age, like, we know that some parents could be very strict and also, well, they're brutally honest when you make a mistake. Like, what happens when you do something you're not supposed to do and you hurt yourself? Check on you, maybe, and then they're like, "Por pendejo!" or "Por pendeja!" Like, you're dumb for doing this. And then also that whole joke about, Vicks. Clearly, when you're like a marginalized community who doesn't have a lot of access to, medical care, you have to, like, rely on the things closest to you. It's just a lot of context, and of course, I feel like, strict parents in general, not just Latinx ones, like, there's a lot of anxiety and, like, I also feel like sometimes while they could be judgy towards other parents, like, oh, I can't believe they let them go to sleepovers at this other kid's house. I bet they let their kids go anywhere. Like, I feel like there's some real need for help, and that, I'm sorry, little loss here. Like, they just need a little help opening up, should you say. I also want to say, like, some parents, they come from their upbringings and they think, well, so-and-so being tough on me or me being deprived of this thing helped form my character to be resilient and a good citizen, so I'll do the same to my own kids. And they don't see the harm in that, You don't see the harm if it's normalized to you. So this brings me to the podcast. I love them, of course, but I have my critiques. For example, I didn't like how I felt like Marianne, like, okay, let's go down to the Babysitters Club. If you don't know, the Babysitters Club consists of these girls, Christy, Claudia, Stacy, Marianne, Dawn, Mallory, Jessie, and much later, Abby. And also some side members, Shannon and Logan. And we're going to focus on the main four, the first five girls here, because they were there. They were in the club first. Christy is a leader. She's very outspoken. She could be bossy. She's considered less mature than the other girls. She's a resilient kid. But she does stick her foot in her mouth. We have Claudia, who, in the first book, she came off a little snooty, especially when it came to Marianne and Christy. And she just came off a little snooty, like she was a little above it all. but she's a artist. She's often othered for her Japanese heritage. The whole almond eyes and being described as exotic, which is pretty cringy. She's not very good at school, and she gets a lot of grief from her parents because of that. And she has a genius older sister that. This is where I also love the podcast, like, where they focus on, like, how feministy the series was, but unfortunately the two certain women, like Morbida Destiny, who lives next door to Christy's mother's fiance's house, later Christy's stepfather, like, she's being called a witch by even the babysitters because she's a little eccentric. She keeps to herself. She looks strange. She's older. She lives alone. And also Janine, Claudia's older sister, like, she's not considered as pretty as Claudia. She's not interested in babysitting. She's interested in, like, logic. She's very good at school. She excels very well at school. She's not very fashionable. And these are the two women that are always, like, always given, they're not given as much grace in the series, and that's really problematic. Like, my thing is, like, your feminism has to include even women you don't like to be treated well. It even has to include the unfuckables, the undesirables, the freaks, the girls you don't see eye to eye with. Like, they need their human rights too. That's my thing, And I think that's where I feel like the Netflix series does it a little better. Like Janine and Morbida, really, Mrs. Porter, they're like, yeah, they're strange, but they're kind of strange. It's just another way of being who they are in the world. It's not necessarily worse than the babysitters and their mom's way of being. It's not certainly any better, but it is what it is, That's how they operate. Nothing bad about that. And I appreciate the Netflix show for that. So Claudia always feels inferior to her older sister Janine for being a genius, and in turn, like, the original book series looks down on Janine for that, because protagonist-centered morality if you're a TV tropes fan. And then we have Stacey McGill, who was born in Manhattan. She's a very privileged girl. She gets her hair permed. She's described as looking like a supermodel. Like, she's very tall, thin, and pretty with long permed blonde hair. Oddly, her hair doesn't look permed on the book illustrations, but oh well. She has diabetes, and at the time when the books were written, that disease was extremely rare. Extremely rare. Oh, I also want to say, like, this is where you cannot assume weight equals health, because Stacey is a thin girl. She was thin before the diabetes and still thin after the diabetes. Shit happens, And, she was also pretty much formative for many disabled readers, because diabetes is a disability, because you're likely to lose your foot or get blind if it's not managed correctly, or if something goes wrong, because shit happens. Remember, you can't go around blaming people, because shit happens. Life is random. Stacey's very fashionable. She's described as very sophisticated. She's also considered more mature than some of the other girls. Like, Christy is still very close to her mom. And that's like an element of her not being mature as the other girls. But, girls like Christy who develop later, especially get their periods later, they're more likely to not deal with as much mental health issues as earlier menarche and bloomers. And, Stacey feels her parents are overbearing, especially about her diabetes, because they panicked about it a lot. And then we have Marianne, whose mother died when she was 18 months old. She's very shy. She's very passive. She's very quiet. She has a rather strict and overbearing father who, throughout the series, you couldn't find, and the Netflix show does it well, he's just a dad. He's just dealing with his own tragedy of losing his wife at a young age and of raising his daughter by himself. And he doesn't even know if he's doing it right. So he also comes off as a little old-fashioned because in the earlier series, he only lets Marianne wear braids and really preppy clothes that harken back to an earlier era, and no pants. A Netflix show, she's wearing pants. Because even more conservative households now, they don't look down on women wearing pants as much. But this, but that's how he was taught, a proper girl was supposed to act. And it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We'll get into that later. And then we have Dawn Schaefer, who's from California, and she's a blonde. And as a Californian here, some of us were always irked at how California was made to look in the series. Everyone in California is blonde, and they look like movie stars, and they're all vegetarians, and they don't have garage sales. We do. We have garage sales. Some of us eat meat. I remember many times, we'd have some carne asada. We have carne asadas, in my culture. We don't all look like movie stars. Made me wonder if the original author, Anna Martin, really went to California. So, on to the podcast, which focuses on Marianne Saves the Day when, Marianne's forced to rely on her own wits. And they can really get to talking about Marianne's father. And there's some things I kind of have trouble with. So, we're going to start right now. The theme song is going to start. There's no way I can skip it, so I'll give you a thumbs up as soon as it's over, in case you want to skip through yourself.
I met my best friend in 1985, and the babysitter's son kept her friendship alive. Then Emily was born in 1988. She said, "Thanks, Aunt Esme, these books are great. Now we're all grown up, and we're living our dreams as a writer and a scholar and an expert on tea. And we're gonna start again from the very first book because we're stuck in Stoneybrook." Welcome to Stuck in Stoneybrook, a podcast about the Babysitters Club. Today we're discussing book 4, Marianne Saves the Day. Yay! Yay, Marianne! Yay. Okay, so let's get into our one-sentence summaries. Mine is, a civil war breaks out in the Babysitters Club as Marianne begins her she's all that transformation.
Fair, very fair. Mine is simple this week. It's Marianne grows a pair.
Nice. I like that. Mine is, a highly dramatic and arbitrary fight over nothing threatens friendship among 4 middle schoolers, ultimately leading to the introduction of a 5th member to their babysitting business.
Very nice. Very
I really
nice.
liked how Marianne was like, well, our club is more of a business. It's not really a club.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Okay, wait, you guys, we should probably back up and tell everyone about the members of the podcast. I'm Esme Schaller, an adolescent psychologist. I'm kind of bossy, and I have a big heart.
I'm Emily Crandall, a feminist scholar. I'm a total individual, and I like health food.
And I'm Anne Ichikawa, a freelance writer and a mischievous pragmatist with a sweet tooth. So, let's get into exactly how Marianne saves the day. How does she save the day? Does she save herself? So, the babysitters get into a really big fight that lasts apparently weeks. And years, which is breaking the club rule.
Yeah, they're really obsessed with job hogging.
Yes. Do you guys think this is worthy of an argument that the whole book is based around?
Christy, I feel like it's not just the fact that Christy took a job without asking. It's the fact that she made the rule and then she broke it, you know? Yeah, but they also just kind of... It's a double injury. It's fair. It is a double injury. But I also think she just took the opportunity, like they all took the opportunity to just say like all of the worst things that they think about each other. Like the second they had the chance. It was, so, I mean, we'll get to this at the end, but the trope count in terms of like who's babyish and who's bossy is like off the charts.
There's a lot of baby and bossy going on.
Oh yeah. So I feel like to me it was like there's this like simmering aggression below the surface in the BSC, and then like one too many incidents of job hoggery, and it was like let her rip.
Yeah. Claudia was the first name caller because she called Christy a job hog, and that really ignited the fire. And then, let's see, turn the page here.
So you're blaming Claudia? You place the blame squarely on Claudia?
Well, I feel like, yes, Claudia. I take full responsibility for this fight. And then Stacy kind of reminds Claudia that she took a job without asking everyone else. So then Stacy kind of jumps in. And as Esme said, everyone takes this opportunity to air all their grievances immediately. Which I started thinking about, what if we just did that all the time? Like, what if what if Emily talked over me now and I just took that opportunity to be like, Emily,
shut the fuck up. Think you're so smart?
You're so smart with your PhD.
Yes. Yeah. No, it would be really interesting though if like in like corporate meetings at work, people were just like, and another thing, Craig, like you.
Your ideas suck.
Craig. Yeah. Craig's ideas do suck. Yeah. No, but I do think it's fairly realistic. They are just 12, you know, they're so mature in many other ways, but like they don't know how to do relationships. Like they're learning.
Yeah, I thought of that, but I didn't get into fights as a kid. Did like friendship fights really? Did you guys?
I mean, you didn't get into fights because I just took it when you were mean to me. Oh shit, you're about to get in a friendship fight right now? Because I didn't fight back. Wow. Claudia. Do you guys need to take a time out to air some grievances?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like they go a little off the course. It's like, I'm here for you to review a book, not to hear all about your business and a bunch of giggling. I know, I mean. But I don't like the apologia because the actual fight in the book was like really nasty and there were a lot of name calling, and then Marianne just, you know, she happens to be in the fight, you know what I mean? She happens to be collateral damage, and that's what gets her so mad. And she just tells everyone, y'all the worst, y'all the worst. You're bossy, you're stuck up, you're a jerk. Y'all are the worst, especially for name calling me when I haven't even done nothing to you. Like, I really felt for Marianne in that one. Moving on.
I feel like I was never a name caller though. That's just kidding.
Yeah, but I know what you mean in terms of like standing up for yourself directly and like yelling at someone and like sticking your tongue out and saying like, I don't like you anymore. I don't remember things like that. I don't know. What about you, Em? No, same. I think it was a lot more, you get your feelings hurt, you kind of sulk about it, you talk about it with somebody else, and then you get over it. Or you sort of like fall, you know, friendships kind of dissolve and change, fall by the wayside. Yeah, I think I had a couple more explicit tips with my friends that I've been friends with the longest, but nothing so spontaneous and so encompassing of a group.
Yeah, you didn't stick your tongue out at your friends and like give them the evil eye.
No, but Aaron and I used to fight like maniacs over nothing, and it was horrible. We were really, really mean to each other, and the escalation was like instant, and it would take us ages to calm down. So Erin is Emily's younger sister, who's less than 2 years younger than her. I'm wondering if that's, but you guys spent a lot of time together. You know, I don't think that at 12 I had somebody that I walked to and from school with every day and, you know, saw 3 times a week and tried to run a business with. And, you know, I think maybe it is a function of the amount of time they spent together. It's more realistic that this was something that could blow up like this. Yeah, and I think that, and this will come up again in the next book, but the like jealousy thing, I think was a big like catalyst of fights for me and Aaron as well. You know, Aaron was very sensitive about being left out of stuff, and I was kind of precious about including her also, so it like made sense. And like, I'm doing something with my friends, I spend all the time with you, why do you need to be there? And she's like, I just want to hang out and be part of it. And that like that kind of undercurrent, I think, was the baseline of a lot of fights we had, stupid fights we had over nothing. Right. And so that makes sense to me, especially given, you know, we learn more in this book about Marianne's positioning in the world and how, like, very lonely her life is, which I, you know, as a functional only child with older parents and, you know, siblings that had long moved out of the house, which I really related to in terms of her, like, quiet evenings with Mr. Spear and really feeling like she couldn't talk to him. And, you know, she really only had Christy.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of her Vesmi description of her alone in her like room, and the description of her room was really like stood out to me in this book. And that damn Humpty Dumpty picture.
Yeah, I know.
She mentioned like 20 times in the book.
Yeah. But I think, you know, without Christy, she doesn't have any, you know, Christy's her whole entree into the world. She's her entree into, like, big, loud families and closeness. She's her friend. She, like, connects her with the Shilliver twins. She can, you know, and so for that bond to be broken even momentarily is really, really scary. And it was neat to see her utilize that as a way to sort of step up in the world.
So let's talk about Marianne's dad for a second, Mr.
Here we go.
Who will later be known as Richie.
Emily just took like a deep breath and steeled herself for this conversation.
Yeah.
I think I hate Mr. Spear.
Whoa, he's just a lonely widow trying to raise a daughter.
He's doing the best he can, Emily. No, he's trying to raise his daughter to like replace his wife. It's gross. Tell us more. I don't know. All of this is the way he treats Marianne is like icky and super uber patriarchal. It's like she prepares dinner for him. He chats with her about his cases over, you know, a polite meal chat. I'm just like, ugh, there's nothing like fun about it. About their relationship or their dynamic. And I think the way he mobilizes like the demand or requirement for him to be both her father and mother as an excuse for not like letting her, you know, explore who she is and as a justification for all of his arbitrary rules about her behavior is kind of bullshit. What would make it not bullshit? Like he's not, well, first of all, like what does he mean by like having...
Okay, before we go on to her convo, I just want to say, like I know a lot of kids, especially in my culture, who are expected to help out around the house and then prepare dinner. Like nothing. Like even like going with my mother, like when she was a little, like she learned how to make tortillas on a hot comal by the time she was 5 years old. Like, especially because my grandmother was basically a single mother. And she had these 8 kids, like the older kids, especially the girls, they were expected to, I mean, my older uncles and my older aunts, a lot of them, especially my mom, were forced to like grow up quickly, you know? Like really forced to grow up quickly. Like my grandmother was struggling. You know, the kids needed to be looked after. Like the little babies needed to be looked after. Dinner needed to be prepared. And about fun parenting, like there's not a lot of that in like some Latino households unless the parents are trying to take the piss out of their kids, you know? And there's some light trolling, but you know, most of the time it's like, do as I say because I'm in charge. I'm your parent, and and I pay the rent. Do pagas renta? You know, do you pay the rent? Often used as an excuse. I mean, it was taken for granted. I mean, there were even, and I just want to say, like Mr. Spear, Richie Spear, if we're so inclined. Like compared to most parents I know of, he's not that strict. Like if we go on to the books, most strict parents wouldn't let. I always joke, you know, they wouldn't let like their kids go on a trip with another family to a city far away. Like they wouldn't, especially if they don't know that family that long. And then in Logan Likes Marianne, like a strict parent would not like the idea of their daughter having a boyfriend. But you know, he's a smart man. He knows what's going on in his back seat. Like even though they're not making out, he knows like Marianne has a boy who's interested in her and she's interested in him back. And he doesn't intervene. I mean, they're not doing anything really, so. But he doesn't intervene, you know? And also earlier in that book, when she wants to go to school dance and she wants to get a new outfit, his answer is like, here's my charge card for the department store. Here you go, hon. Like now, actually, there's actually someone who was friends with a Latina girl, and it's like every time she visited, like they weren't allowed to walk to the mall or go any place. The parents said they had to sit on the porch where they could see them. Like I said, you know, a lot of strictness. I mean, you know, for many families, it's like, you know, I have to do what I think is best to help you in this life. So even if you hate me, I still want to succeed in raising you right. That's their mindset.
Her mother as well. Like, what is it that he thinks a mother does differently from a father? And this is just one part of it. And then the other part of it is, how is he actually fulfilling that other role, right? So if he is kind of committed to a traditional sort of model about mothering and fathering, right? That fathers, you know, traditional patriarchal model, right? That fathers care for the family vis-a-vis material needs and mothers do the emotional work or whatever. Like he's not mothering her in any way by that metric at all. So like how exactly is he being mother to her in addition to being father to her? He's also not making himself available to her in any other ways. And in fact, she's like de facto doing his emotional labor, right? She doesn't approach him with things that will upset him in a context in which he's not ready for it, you know. So she's like tiptoeing around all of his moods and all of his, and he makes all the rules, and she just has to like find ways to fit in around him.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop here about emotional labor. It's pretty much taken for granted in most Latinx families about children performing emotional labor, especially daughters. Like even with that thing where your parent is like laying on their bed, they scream for you to come and they tell you, "Please turn off the light for me," and you're like thinking, "Well, it's right there for you to like. You have to just get up or just turn and flip the switch or whatever." Or even like that whole thing about they want you to get the remote even though the remote's right next to them. I heard explained by some mother in a comment section of a YouTube video. And she said sometimes we just like to be reminded that our children will care for us. Which I mean, I don't agree with it, but you know, what she is feeling is true. You know, what she's feeling is true. You know, and also like the emotional labor, it's like look, I like my own mom, my own aunts, some other mother figures. Sometimes it feels like their mode of communication with their children after a certain age is, did you wash dishes? Did you do this? Did you do that? You know, did you do this in the house? Or you need to clean this, or you need to clean that, you know? Like, like we have to press hard for like real deep dives, or we have to initiate the conversations, ask, how was your day? Blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. Like, it's not right, but I understand. And, you know, I don't think it's evil. Like, most people work with the context that they have. And, like I said, some people keep doing the thing that they think, oh, well, it built my character. So I'm going to do this for my kids so it'll build their characters. I also want to say they might look at other families who are more permissive. They might think, that's a no-go for me. Their kids are wilding out. I don't like that. I don't want that in my own home. Like, just watch any episode of Wife Swap. I don't care if it's a new one. I don't care if it's the old ones from the 2000s. It's pretty much the same thing, you know? Like, there's different ideas on how to raise kids, and they clash, you know? And it's mostly sometimes a reaction about, you know, what parent, you know, what no parent wants to send their kid. Most parents do not want their kids to go out in the world all fucked up. And sometimes they work with a limited tool set.
It was very interesting to me the extent to which she walked on eggshells and she was strategic. This is something I obviously see in families I work with, and it's a very common thing in families with a bunch of different kinds of psychopathology, that he's portrayed as such a non-emotional being that it's really interesting how strategic she has to be to bring things to him. I think partly it's she's trained to know when she's more likely to get a yes, but it also feels like she's not, you know, she's trying not to poke the bear, but we don't really get a sense of what it would mean to poke the bear. Like, what does the explosion for Mr. Spear look like? I don't think that that's a thing that happens, but it's still a thing that Marianne remains afraid of.
That also happens. You know, some of us kids, we have to learn how to walk around the bear, how not to poke the bear, when to poke the bear. Like, you know, we have to gauge our parents' moods to figure out. We also sometimes make sure not to screw up. Hence why you do not want to let beans overcook. Nothing will get a Latina mom more pissed off. I swear, you know? And also that one Beto, I don't know if you watch Beto-like or Pero-like, Pero-like, but they had this story, but they had this video, if Are You Afraid of the Dark was Latino, And the story is about a little boy named Pepito who was given one job to do while he's home alone waiting for his mom and his sister. And that was to get the chicken out of the freezer and let it defrost on the counter. And he makes a mess in the kitchen, and he sleeps around, he lazes around, he goofs around. And his mom comes home and sees the house is a disaster, but worst of all, the chicken isn't out defrosting. And then what she does was lift her sandal, and she's Dominican, so this is something some Dominicans say. She says, "Pepito, coño!" Ready to throw the chancla. If y'all gotta, Latinos know what I mean by the chancla. Black people might know it as getting hit with the fly swatter. Some people different people from both cultures or different cultures use a wooden spoon or something to get their kid in line. You know. And what Pepito did not do is an example of how he poked the bear. And, I'm not like pro corporal punishment, but once again, people work within their limited tool set, their own context. Like Pepito. And some people are so bad with words. Like my own mom is bad with words. So it's like, talk to her, why couldn't you just say this? She says, I'm not good with words. And sometimes it's either like a language thing or like I think it's not just Latinx parents. I also feel like a lot of parents from different backgrounds, especially marginalized backgrounds, like it doesn't have to be like a marginalized ethnic group. Like, as we know, Richard comes from he grew up in a working class family. And like, the less privileged, I feel like the less privileged you are as a child, the less likely you would be able to engage in childhood silliness and stuff, You had to grow up faster. You had to learn how to perform. You had to learn to perform certain different things that most adults wouldn't master, even at age 20. You had to learn to cook. You had to learn to do chores. You had to learn to be this and that. And sometimes and then also in the case of police brutality, sometimes, this causes parents to be physically harder on their kids, to make sure they don't get out of line because they fear, if my kid ever gets out of line, that's the end for them. They're going to go to jail. They're going to have that on their record. They're not going to be able to get a good job, or worse, they're going to get killed. And, to me, that says more about our society than it says about, like, the parents and the kids, Like I said, at the end of the day, most parents don't want to send their kids all fucked up.
Yeah, it's weird. Can we look at how he defines a double standard? Sure. I'm very curious about of what happens when Marianne has to call 911 before the background for this.
Sure. So Marianne is babysitting Jenny Prezioso, and she gets very sick, and Marianne's like, oh my god, she has 101 fever, what do I do?
104.
Oh, sorry, 104. So she doesn't know what to do, so she ends up calling 911, and she does all the correct steps and like alerting her parents and, getting help and being very responsible.
And everyone's like super impressed. And so then her dad's like, okay, I guess I need to reevaluate, all my arbitrary rules for you. And so this is the conversation they're having around his reevaluation. He sighs and he's like, you're growing up right before my eyes. I like that she really snottily editorializes as if it was some sort of revelation to him. And then she says, well, I am 12. And he says, I know, but 12 means different things for different people. It's like clothes. You can put a certain shirt on one person and he looks fabulous. By the way, do we think Mr. Spear sounds fabulous? I think he does. Then you put the shirt on someone else and that person looks awful. It's the same way with age. It depends how you wear it or carry it. And she says, you mean some 12-year-olds are ready to date and other 12-year-olds still need babysitters? And he says, exactly. And then Marianne asks, but isn't that a double standard? And he responds, no, just the opposite. An example of a double standard would be that just because a boy or girl had turned 14, he or she would automatically be encouraged to date, no matter how mature he or she was. But absolutely no 13-year-old would be encouraged to do so. Is that a double standard?
I want to say, most Latinx parents don't go that far as Mr. Spear explaining their BS. Most of them just stick with, nope, I'm the parent, you do what I say, you're the child, you do what I say, I pay the rent. End of discussion.
No, that seems just like a strict rule. Yeah, so my questions for you are two. Okay. First of all, is that a double standard? Is he right that that's a double standard? And if it is, even a little bit, is that a good example to be using in this context? I think it's horrible. I didn't answer my own question. Sorry.
We have different versions of horrible, milady.
I agree. I also was like, what is he talking about? And I honestly, probably like my childhood me, I was like, well, Mr. Spear is really smart, so maybe I just didn't get it. I didn't pause there very long to ponder it in the way you did. And yeah, it seems like a pretty poor example of a double standard. Because I think at that time, like, that's a really, I guess if Mr. Spear is this like patriarchal traditionalist, / maybe he's quite conservative, we can move toward that in a minute, that like I guess he wouldn't take this opportunity to employ like the most useful double standard example at that moment, which would be that we let boys and girls do different things for different reasons, right? And so he's like draws this arbitrary distinction between being 13 and 14 as a rubric for making sense of how a double standard works, when he could have just, he has a boy or girl, right, in the example, he could have actually, taught her something about, like, how double standards work to police gender. But, right. Yeah, but he's not going to use this moment to unveil the patriarchy, Emily. That's not what Richie's down for. Because he wants her to wear braids and skirts and penny loafers. He needs to maintain it. He's not gonna take the second to handle it.
Take a moment to examine Mr. Spear a little bit deeper. Because, okay, so it seems as though, do we know how old he is? We know that Don's mom is the same.
Oh yeah, we do know how old they are. Let's see. I think he graduated, I think they were born in, oh God, I did this math and now I forget.
I think they're in their 30s though, it seems. So he probably had Marianne in his, I would say mid-20s.
I think when he was 29, I think they're in their early 40s.
Oh, okay.
But we could do this math.
Him and Don's mom dated in high school, and then he met Marianne's mother very quickly after they got married. So that tells me they met in college and they got married after college.
It says he's 42.
42 forever.
Which means he would be 41 in this book, because I think I did work backwards when I was reading it from the yearbooks to figure out the year they graduated from college. But basically, he had Marianne at 29, or graduated from high school. So he had Marianne at 29. So if Marianne is 12 in 86, she was born in 74. And so then he would have graduated from high school in 64.
Okay.
So, which means that he was born in 1946.
So Marianne's mother died when she was a baby, I believe, of cancer.
Yeah, also her name is wrong in this book too, just like Elizabeth Brewer. I'm sorry. She's called Abigail in this book, and forward she's always called Alma. So I don't know why in the first 4 books,
Wait, she's called Alma
this one? Oh, I have a new one. Aha.
Oh.
So,
I was so confused about your comment in the notebook.
in the original, she is called Abigail,
Wow.
which is not accurate. Sorry, go ahead, Anne. I just had to get it out there. They keep changing the moms' names.
It's very strange that they did that. So Mr. Spear was a widow, and let's see, around 30 then. He was 30, 31. And he's raised Marianne by himself that entire time. I'm interested to know if, like, so he hasn't had sex in, like, 12 years, probably.
I mean, we're making an assumption there. He's a busy lawyer. He works late. He goes to the office on Saturdays. He could have all kinds of affairs with paralegals and stuff or other lady lawyers.
That doesn't seem on brand for Mr. Spear, though. Although, it could.
No, that's fair.
I feel like
It's fair that
in
it's
my
on brand.
head, Mr. Spear is either just a sad, lonely man who is, like, depressed, or he's some, like, really fucked up incel type of guy who just wants to keep women down or something.
Oh, can we not label Richie Spear an incel? I would really prefer not to do that. I don't know. Emily might take up your cause, but
Well, look, at the best, even if he's not a horrible encapsulation of sort of the most toxic version of masculinity, he's still, like, probably a conservative dude who's committed to, like, the personal responsibility ethic and, like, participates in all these, like, subtle structural, modes of oppression, right? Like, he voted for Reagan, probably. Because all of Connecticut did.
Oh, this is where I gotta stop. Probably Richard Spear in the books voted for Reagan. This is a differentiate him from the Richard Spear in the Netflix series, who is very supportive of his co-worker who has a transgender daughter. Yes, like, he voted for Reagan. I'm pretty sure a lot of the babysitter's parents voted for Reagan. That would be an interesting deep dive to see which parents have which kind of political inclinations. What do you think? What's a lot about the babysitters? I could also read. One could even do an article on, like, which babysitters would become which type of Karen, because they're around that age. As we go in later in the series, sometimes Marianne seems like a Karen, like she knows how to weaponize her passivity and her vulnerability in ways that can seem kind of manipulative. Dawn can be a Karen because she throws fits over things, like even like calling someone out for, like, how dare they eat meat, or this or that. Like, well, I could even see her as one of those landlords from Brooklyn who told their tenants to put up with the rats because they don't want to be haunted by the souls of the rats. Christy might be a Karen, or she might be the mega Karen who is the manager. Stacy might be a designer Karen. Let's hope Claudia doesn't become one of those MLM essential oils Karens. But it would be fun to think about that. They should actually do one. Like, okay, who voted for who? Why? What's your evidence? Why? Blah 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 blah. That kind of thing. That would be really good. And yes, Reagan attracted a lot of conservative people. He also attracted a lot of people who were very attracted to his image on TV and attracted to his image of positivity and also the patriotism. And if it sounds like I'm giving Richard Spear and a lot of strict or overbearing parents grace, I feel a little, if you watched For Harriet, and you should, For Harriet's Kimberly Nicole Foster, she did a review of the Clark sisters miniseries or movie, and she talks about how it's important to give grace to her elders who are working with a different tool set. That doesn't mean we condone their actions, because a Clark sister's mother can be, rightfully called an abusive mother. But of course, she was taking choices because she felt like, this is going to help my daughters become successful. So even if I damage my relationship with them, there's also like negative outcomes, because, Dr. Maddie and Moss Clark, like Richard Spears in danger of doing, they're in danger of rendering their children so passive that if they ever die, that child would not know how to emotionally hold himself up. Like, there's like a real lack of autonomy there, a real lack of initiative. This is also a problem with helicopter parents. I don't want to come down on like parents too hard because, like they're working with a different skill set, but this doesn't mean I condone action. So don't use that as a get out of jail free card, okay? But I'm not going to come on down hard. Actually, there's a father that they will review later in the Babysitters Club series, and I'll get to that. One who I feel is more problematic.
I want to know. Yeah, and Reagan's been president for 6 years at this point. Yeah, so they were living high on Reaganomics. Although it's interesting because when we get into Mrs. Schaefer's parents, dislike of him or distrust of him as a teenager, and they set it up as a kind of class conflict. There's like some cloudiness around that in this book, and I think we're supposed to believe that he's sort of upwardly mobile. But like whether or not, I guess it would have been possible for him in the like late 60s, early 70s as like a white dude who would have had access to education. But like that wouldn't have been possible for like the girls' generation of kids. Like they wouldn't have had that experience of kind of upward social mobility in Connecticut in the 80s and 90s. Even with their scrappy entrepreneurial spirit? No. Well, they're white, so probably. Except Claudia. Right. Oh, so like even if he's not an incel type of toxic masculinity, he's still, he has problematic politics. Oh, I'm not saying he's not problematic. Let's be clear. I just don't want to label him an incel. I don't want to use the internet in 1986. He definitely doesn't. Like, I don't want the internet and the internet version of toxic masculinity painting Mr. Spear. I just can't. I do think to Anne's earlier point, though, that the fact that he starts to loosen up on Marianne around the same time that he has like a returning love interest, aka is getting laid, is like those are probably revealing to like what was going on before, right? That maybe his like strictness and his loneliness were sort of tied up to one another in a way that like is patriarchal and problematic for Marianne. Yeah. Well, and
I can't help but think it's really vulgar. Maybe it's normal for other folks. Maybe it's my cultural context speaking. But I remember recalling, like, growing up, like, like single parents cannot, they have to be careful about entering into relationships when they have children, especially when their children are involved. Like, I know when my cousin was dating after her divorce, like, I had some relatives concerned, like, she was probably sleeping around or just dating guy after guy after guy, and, like, like it's unstable for her kids because they don't know who she's going to end up with. They don't know if he's going to be a fixture in your life. she was really careful. She really picked and chose well. She eventually remarried, and she had some more kids, and I know there was like a slut shaming element to that, but there was, to be true, there was a genuine concern for her children because, they already experienced a breakdown of one relationship, and that wasn't my cousin's fault, and, like they didn't want them to go through another. I felt like my cousin was pretty brave for like ending the relationship. I also wondered what made her what made her make that decision, but she made a decision that was right for her and her family. And, she really advocated for herself right there. But, coming from that context, I would think it's verboten to like enter a relationship so suddenly and start sleeping around, especially when you have children involved. Like, do you bring them home or something? Like, it just doesn't read as appropriate to me, especially because Dawn's mother, she's also a mother, a single mom herself. It's like, you don't want to, like, and maybe it's not just where I'm coming from. Like, I read, Kamala Harris, she's running for vice president right now. When she was dating her husband, Doug Emhoff, he was a single divorced dad. He had 2 little kids, and I think I read like they dated for a year before, he introduced her to the kids because, there was that stability, because he wanted that kind of stability for his kids. Like, it just seems kind of sudden for him to be like, here's my new wife, you're your new stepmommy. Like, they have to make sure like their relationship was for the long haul because, he had kids to worry about, and, she shared the same concern too. All in all, you do what's best for you and your family.
Lack of intimacy in general. There's that like really sad, sweet chapter 13, still included in the double standard chapter that we were just talking about, where he's telling Marianne that he's proud of her, and she's sort of seeing like, basically, could I wear my hair down occasionally? And there's like a moment where she wants to hug him and she doesn't. Like, it's very clear that there's like a lot of sort of waspy separation of emotions and intimacy in the family. And then finally at the end of the chapter, she does hug him, but that's like portrayed as a big deal. And so, that like intense loneliness that they both feel kind of in their own little orbits in the house, I can imagine how, enter Sharon Schaefer Porter into the situation, and it can open things up a little bit.
So Marianne in this book, I feel like she talks a lot about, she wants to be more sophisticated, and she wants to dress like Stacy, and she almost like fetishizes Stacy's appearance. I feel like she's like, oh, fluffy blonde hair. So I don't know, I got an impression of Marianne that she was very, she is immature, she's 12, but her notions of like, because she herself is like stuck in this childlike appearance that she sees other people very based on their appearance and like how that relates back to her. For instance, on page 32, when she first meets Dawn, she says, the girl smiled back. She wasn't exactly pretty, I decided, but she was pleasant, which was more important.
I was very personally offended by that.
Me too. I was like, dude, like Marianne.
That was some real shade.
Yeah, she was throwing some subtle shade for sure.
No, I think she just puts people who are like pretty and dress well on a pedestal because...
Well, to a certain extent, though, right? But then you can think about her criticisms of Mrs. Prezioso, who's Jenny's mom and who always looks like she's, quote, dressed out of a magazine, and she dresses Jenny up as her pretty princess. And this is one of our larger themes, I think, that
There's another thing I forgot when I discussed how problematic some of the original book series is with women, about that whole dichotomy, like who's respected and seen as empowering or empowered versus, the kind of woman you shouldn't be, And I can add Mrs. Prezioso and her daughter, 4-year-old daughter Jenny, to that, non aspirational camp, Like Mrs. Prezioso is clearly a woman who cares a lot about appearances. Well, so do, Claudia and Stacy in their own way. She cares about being all dressed up. She cares about dressing up her daughter in like frilly little dresses. And, those two get a lot of shade because Jenny can be bratty for sure. She's 4. But, Jenny also knows her mom likes her dressed up. And she's thrown shade just because she knows her mom likes her dressed up and she doesn't want to mess up her clothes, I always feel like kids know what's a big deal for their parents, Kids read stress. They're a lot smarter than you and I think. So, like, Mrs. Prezioso is the kind of mom you shouldn't be, even though Mrs. Prezioso, she's doing what... I can't be too mad at, like, people who conform because, there's real benefits to, like, that kind of conformity. There's real benefits to rebelling, but there's also, like, drawbacks to both, People are trying to get by through the day. I don't like shaming them. And imagine Mrs. Prezioso who didn't like to get dressed up. Instead, maybe she dressed like a slob, or she always liked to wear sweatpants, and she didn't like to do her hair. She'd be enduring a lot of shade from the babysitters, for sure. So much shade. Moving on.
Emily's interested in talking about is sort of the characterization of the moms of Stoneybrook and who's a good mom and who's not a good mom. We get a lot of like why we love Mrs. Pike in this book and why we don't like Mrs. Prezioso. And one of the big reasons why people don't like Mrs. Prezioso is because of the way she dresses and her sort of performative femininity of like
Marianne calls her fastidious.
Yeah. But I do think it's back to the same idea that you're saying, is that the appearances are very important, and she takes a lot of stock, so she doesn't have like a nuanced understanding of what those different kind of external signifiers might mean.
Yeah, I'm not throwing shade at Marianne either. Maybe more of the books, because Marianne at that point, she's like only 12 years old. She doesn't know. I really love that Netflix episode, where like, it's shown that like, that kind of girliness that Jenny Prezioso and Mrs. Prezioso later changed to Mrs. and Bailey Del Vecchio, encourage and uphold is like very empowering and very expressive for little Bailey, Like this is what makes Bailey feel like a girl, Like she belongs and she's a little girl. I also felt like Richard's, overprotectiveness there was, even more justified and also supported. Like, of course, he'd be an ally to like the mother of a transgender daughter. Like he knows what it's like to like, have this baby and like worry about their safety in a world that's still very small-minded and bigoted and even dangerous, Like he knows, he probably understood. He probably has a good working, and and even if he's an introvert, he probably has a rather standoffish. He has a good working he has a trustworthy working relationship with Mrs. Del Vecchio. For her to, feel good about hiring his daughter as her child's babysitter.
It's interesting that Claudia is just always described as beautiful. Like in every book, Claudia is described that's beautiful and like, you know, really attractive and her skin's so perfect and whatever. And Stacy is like super fashionable and sophisticated. But there's a lot of emphasis on how people look, which it's a book. You gotta build some sort of visual cues to all these characters. But the fact that she decided Dawn wasn't pretty. But I'm sure Emily felt slighted because she relates as a Dawn. So
yeah, I also wonder what, you know, as a kid who, you know, didn't, you know, I'm thinking about children reading this book, right? And I think because of patriarchy and because of lots of other things in our society, I think there are probably a lot of girls that don't view themselves as pretty. And so I'm thinking about, like, what are Anna M. Martin's intentions as the artist and as the author in this situation? So now when we read this as adults, I read it and I'm like, oh, damn, Marianne, like, okay, right? But like as a kid, I was like, oh, that's like me, I'm pleasant. That is more important. You know, I could see that as affirming as a child because you don't, you know, most kids don't identify as being the pretty girl. And like everyone knows, children know that there's not, like, everyone in the class isn't pretty. You know what I mean? And so I think when reading it from that perspective, it makes sense to me as a signifier of like, this is a person who would be a good friend, and like, you don't have to be pretty to be somebody that you would enjoy spending time with, or to be like a good.
She's more trustworthy because she's ugly.
Ooh.
Fair.
Well, it's interesting though, because on the one hand, she might be making space for like, how do we value other things about people than their looks, but on the other hand, she's just sort of replicating the way girls get socialized to pay attention to external signifiers. She's
Absolutely.
not really challenging it, right? I mean, Marianne talks about like how Claudia can eat whatever she wants and she stays skinny, and like Stacy, so like there's a kind of implied preference for a particular body type that Marianne sort of venerates and maybe is like longing for, you know, so like how she views herself is sort of tied up in that, and like her own self-confidence as it links to not just like her fashion, her expression vis-a-vis fashion, but like her body. I mean, I don't think this book is going very far in like sort of naming that as a feature of girls' socialization. She just sort of takes it for granted as kind of like how girls grow up, you know? So there's like a presumptive, like, this is just what girls do kind of nature line here rather than a critical engagement with like, this is how girls get brought up.
Absolutely. But I think that's why, you know, we were all swimming in that water, right? So that's why you can see yourself in it as a girl growing up in the 80s and 90s, is that like, that is true. That was all happening, right? And so we look at it with these different critical lenses now, but I think as a child, if you're living in that same structure, then that helps you find the characters that you relate to. You know, Christy is nice looking, but she doesn't put the time in, kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, I'm Christy. That's my story.
Is Christy supposed to be a tomboy? Does that term come up in these books?
Oh yeah, it
so.
comes up. We'll talk about that more in the next Christy book.
I know I wrote this in the podcast notebook, which everyone of our listeners will have already read by the time they listen to this. But can we please talk about how the librarian is named Mr. Counts?
Oh, yeah, I love that discussion of, you know, that talk about prettiness. And I want to say, not just the 80s. Like, I watched Mad Men. I watched Mrs. America. I watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And speaking as a girl who grew up in the 90s too, there's so much emphasis on looking pretty and looking a certain way for women. And if you don't look that certain way, you're going to get punished. You're going to get penalized somehow. There's even... you can even get penalized for looking a certain kind of pretty. Like many people who get those benefits of being considered pretty, they're sometimes not taken seriously for their intelligence. They're not taken seriously at all. They're over idealized too. Or they're expected to shut up and not express themselves. And when they do, ooh, here comes the pushback. Here comes the backlash. Like on Mad Men, like Everyone likes to complain about like how vain Betty is, and she is, but why not? Betty was told like being pretty was all she had to offer. It is the proper thing for a woman to be. So of course she's gonna soup up the rewards of that as much as she can, you know? Like no one was talking about her anthropological smarts. She has a bachelor's in anthropology. No one was going to talk about her good grades or her skills in sewing. No one was going to talk about her cooking, you know? It was all about her as she relates to men in the male gaze. Same thing with Joan, except a little different. But when Joan, you know, she goes from being all sassy queen bee with the secretaries and like holding her in, you know, telling men what to do, you know, she gets a lot of pushback, especially with, you know, the higher she rises. Like certain men seem to be intent on punishing her for looking the way she does and being in that position of power and for being smarter than they. Like they want to punish her. And the same thing with Peggy when she gained weight when she was pregnant in season 1. Like she was getting all this shade and all this disrespect just because she didn't look the same as she did, just because she was putting on weight. Like the benefits are great when you're considered a certain kind of pretty, but the drawbacks are vast also. Like even the same thing in Mrs. America, like clearly Sarah Paulson's character Alice, you know, she was raised to like be this pretty little housewife after she was prom queen and to marry early. And she's a housewife and, you know, she has a grown-up son who's in the army and she has like 2 younger daughters, one of whom's going to graduate and move to like Boston to start her own life. Like, and Alice feels lost because what are all these feminists talking about the Equal Rights Amendment and like going to work and such, and all these women are becoming doctors and lawyers. Where do I fit in? Especially because I think it's hinted, you know, she's afraid her husband's gonna leave her. It reminds me of that song, He Thinks He'll Keep Her, which if you know the original Geritol commercial with that term, my wife, I think I'll keep her. It's like, you know, if you stop short as like a wife back then, if you're not this or that enough, like your husband could leave you and replace you with someone else. And it's devastating. Moving on.
Why? I don't know, I think it's really funny. Should we be a math teacher? The observation that this doesn't lead to discussion, but the whole fight takes place in the beginning because Claudia is looking in the bottom of her pajama bag for some ring dinks or something. What's a pajama bag? Exactly. And they mention it like 3 times. And I'm like, is this some New England convention that you keep your pajamas in a bag? If we have any listeners who grew up in New England in the 80s, can you please let us know if a pajama bag was an important accessory in your bedroom? Because us California girls have no idea what you're talking about. Unless, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a Japanese thing. Anne, is it a pajama bag?
Yes, it's a traditional thing that all Japanese people do. We store pajamas in a bag.
Laughing so hard I can't talk. Okay, so back to my original question, New Englanders, let us know if you have a pajama bag.
I'd like to touch on quickly about Marianne's conversation with me, where she has a heart talk with Claudia's grandmother Mimi, and then she calls Marianne kind of a pet name, or she calls her my Marianne, and Claudia overhears her grandmother saying that to Marianne, and she's like, you only call me my Claudia, you don't even call Janine that, and Claudia gets very, very upset. I remember as a child like crying over this part for some reason. It was like really sad to me. But I can't really really understand, I guess just Claudia, Mimi is the only person that really understands Claudia, so she feels like Marianne somehow, she doesn't feel as special. But also,
there's so many.
I want to say that it's probably easier for Claudia to lash out at Marianne because Marianne's not going to talk back or snap at her than it is at the people that Claudia really has issue with, like her parents. But also feels like really Claudia came off as really bratty in that book. Like, Claudia giveth and Claudia taketh away.
Layers to this.
Yeah. It's also like, is there a little bit of like the old wise Asian person bestowing, wisdom onto, someone else type of thing, which is kind of, I'm not offended by it by any means, but as an adult reading it, it did kind of, because you kind of picture Mimi talking in this slight accent, drinking tea, and giving this person like all these like fortune cookie like tidbits of life lessons and stuff.
True. Like, man, Mimi couldn't be described as some sassy old person or a shady old person. Pretty much. Like, it had to be about her passing on wisdom all the time, I liked how what the treatment they gave Mimi in the Netflix series. Like indeed she and Marianne meet over tea and knitting. And also Mimi sounds like a lot of Midwestern like moms in like TV shows, And also, of course, she was friends with Marianne's mom and told stories to her about her mother.
That's when she says, when Marianne's complaining about the Humpty Dumpty picture, and she said, "Do you know who Humpty Dumpty is?" And Mimi says, "Yes, it's the shattered egg man." That was exactly what line I was going to point to.
Me too. That was one of my favorite lines in the book.
It's really cute. Yeah, I mean, she's not wrong, and I could totally see your mom saying something like that when we were growing up. And I think it's important for us to watch this kind of trope with Mimi going forward of like when she's like the wise Asian commentator, and then on the other hand, the three of these girls, all the same age, are growing up on Bradford Court. Almost Beard dies. Elizabeth Brewer has a lot of children, and then this shifty ex-husband. So she's busy, and Claudia's parents both work. And so I can see how Mimi becomes the grandmother of the street and becomes a significant adult in Marianne's life, given her motherless status. And so I don't want to, I appreciate, frankly, especially for the mid-1980s, the cultural competence of Anna Martin having a grandmother living with the Kishis and having her exist as a whole person, and not only, spewing haiku to the neighborhood children
over tea.
Over tea. But I think it's, what do we want her to be? Do we want her not to be Japanese? Like, do we want her not to, like, what would the alternative be? What would be the better portrayal of her?
Yeah, I don't think it's bad necessarily. It's just something that I picked up on as an adult that I didn't at all as a kid.
Yeah.
I don't know, I think it's more like, grandmother giving someone, younger advice is not a big deal, but I think you add into that how she's obviously just making like green tea and like a Japanese tea set, because she talks about how it doesn't have handles and there's special little teacups. I think like it's like those types of things that are kind of like tack on those stereotypes a little bit, and just like, she's like so serene, and my mom's not serene, and she's an old Japanese woman. Like, not all old Asian women are serene.
Yeah. back to the argument and the My Marianne thing, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, Mimi's the only person that's consistently in Claudia's corner in her family. Like, she feels less than with her parents and with Janine all the time. And so, but I also remember feeling really torn as a kid, like, understanding Claudia's sadness, but then also being like, bitch, what do you want Marianne to do? She's got literally no one. Like, you feel, like, inadequate for your parents and Janine, but like we've had a long talk about Mr. Spear. Like, Marianne is alone in this world, and so like, what is it?
Voting conservative father,
right? So, what is it to you that Mimi has tea with her like once a month? You know what I mean? Like, you get Mimi all the time, and this is her like little, as a only child who adopted many other people's families, like, this is her like scrap of closeness with an older woman. So it's hard. Like, I definitely see both sides of their
I have
position.
a question. In the earlier books, I can't remember which book, in one of the earlier books, one of the girls suggests to Marianne that she ask Mimi something that she doesn't know because her mom is dead. Do you remember who suggests that? Is it Claudia or is it Christy?
I think it is Claudia. I think in general Claudia is quite generous with Mimi, but then in the context of this fight and her feeling alone already.
I also want to mention, I hope the Netflix series explores more of the inner life of Claudia's parents and grandmother and Janine. I liked what they did with Janine and Claude and Mimi, though. I really did. I really, really do.
That happened with all the users. You just haven't talked about it that much. It's pretty ridiculous. Nicole.
Yeah. Talk about how Stacy smushes a wet paper towel into Claudia's face.
Not just wet,
it's from New York.
Yeah. They get it serious, like, Real Housewives type shenanigans at Jamie Newton's birthday party. It's like dangerous. Yeah. But the fight is also our entry point for Dawn. So without the fight, Marianne would have never left the table with Christy and the Shilliver twins and would never have met Dawn.
Yeah, I thought it was messed up that they got into a little hissy fight at a toddler's birthday party. Like, behave yourself, girls. Behave. I also learned from the series and from life that some, not all, white parents. I mean, like my therapist's in-laws, they were pretty strict, but a lot of white parents seem to be more permissive than Latinx parents in my experience. And like Mrs. Newton's reaction was to be shocked, not like, "Ooh, you give up? Well, I'm gonna call your mamas. I'm gonna call your mamas. I'm gonna call your mommies. I'm gonna call your mommies if you don't give it up." Messing up my son's birthday.
So
this ugly girl from California.
She's pleasant looking, and she's pleasant looking.
Pleasant looking.
I do think it's kind of, the introduction to Dawn is interesting because she gets like really self-righteous when she figures out that Marianne, lied about her friends being absent, but then she's like pretty quick to forgive. Like, yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't know anything about being overly self-righteous, but
yeah, I was actually surprised that she got self-righteous at all, given the context, because Dawn ain't got nobody, right? Yeah. So similar to Stacy Spear in the last book that we were talking about, that the club would be disbanded and she would be in trouble as being the new person. Like, I would have, if I was in Dawn's position and I actually liked Marianne and I had this cool backstory about our parents dating in high school, I would have been mad, but I wouldn't have like stormed off and not spoken to her again. Like, this is back to that, like, how do girls handle.
I love what they did with Dawn in the Netflix series. Like, she's all fired up, but, she's a lot more likable. And she's more patient with Marianne. That's good.
Betrayal and aggression. I was sort of surprised, but she has a little bit of a hot temper. We see that over time with Dawn, I think. So,
an important question.
Yeah.
Do we think Dawn has had her period?
I think she has.
Dawn is consistently portrayed as like the bridge between Christy and Marianne and Stacy and Claudia. She's the in-between one. So yeah, if she hasn't, she's getting it next month. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, Anne, what kind of junk food was in this?
Wait, can we please, before we go to Claudia's junk food, can we talk about what song Claudia's singing? Wait, finally into the book.
It's on page 83.
So they've divided up the club meetings because they can't speak to each other. So one club member is going each day of the week that there's a meeting and answering the phone in Claudia's room, and they can take all those jobs if they can. If not, they have to call the other girls and offer them around. So Marianne's on her shift, and Claudia is listening to some music.
Esme, do you would like to do a interpretation of these lyrics?
Oh man, why are you gonna throw that to me? I feel like either one of you could do that for sure. I think Anne should do it.
Well,
Yeah, I think you should do it. Yeah, exactly. I don't name call.
I can't figure out if it's like a rap or like a song or like the style of song.
I think you should rap it. I think it's definitely a rap.
A couple different ways, and then we can decide.
So it's like dum-dee-dum-dee-dum-dum. Can't live without you. Ooh, 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 ooh.
What? I yelled.
Dee-doo, my life is you. Ooh, ooh.
Claudia, can you please turn that down? I shouted.
And then this
Claudia,
is the best
ignore
part.
me. She's singing along with the tape.
Dee-doo, dee-da. It's like at the top.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it goes.
Is that a real song? First of all, is Claudia is she doing like scatting because she doesn't know the lyrics, or is that part of the song? Is my other question.
Yeah, I was like, Anna Marty, couldn't you figure out some better lyrics?
If anyone wants me to make a guess, it sounds like an Air Supply song, just by the lyrics. I don't know about the dum. I don't even think that Claudia's even doing the video. La 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 la.
Apparently not. All right, we can do candy now. Thank you.
Not a lot of candy in this book, but a lot of Hostess products. Which makes me think Twinkies are mentioned so many times. Like, what if Hostess was like some sort of advertiser of Scholastic at the time? And this is like product placement.
All right, how can we find that out?
I don't know. So we have Ring Dings, Twinkies, Yodels, and also chewing gum, which isn't really a thing, but
Yeah.
3 Hostess products in Claudia's bedroom is quite a bit.
I do have cravings. Yeah, I have cravings for Hostess every time I read a Babysitter's Club book, basically. This is not a thing that I eat in my normal life, but as Anne mentioned, we used to have a treat drawer in my parents' house, and it would often have the individually wrapped Hostess, particularly the cupcakes and Twinkies.
Another way to try and dawn.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the cupcakes.
Yeah, the cups are quite good. So I mentioned...
I love the cupcakes, especially the chocolate ones. I had one recently.
At the top, the tallies in this book are off the charts. Marianne is very judgmental, but also they call each other this frequently. So, as Marianne continues to try to make up with Christy, then they get in a fight and she calls Christy bossy again and Christy calls her a baby again. So, grand total of 10 times.
Christy was mean in that book. Like, baby, baby, baby. Like, I wondered, you even like Marianne? I wondered, y'all like each other? Y'all need to go to some friend therapy. I think there should be friends therapy. They have couples therapy. They have family therapy. They should have therapy for friends.
Times that either Christy or Marianne are referred to as babyish or a baby in this book. 10 times Christy labeled bossy. But previously, all 3 of the first books had been once that Christy had been called bossy. Now we're at 10. Which I think, props up this idea of bossiness being weaponized. I said in the prologue, I wanted to see when is it admiring versus when is it, a sort of sexist slur. And I think it's very slurry in this book. Stacy's referred to as sophisticated once, and Claudia is referred to as sophisticated once. Marianne's referred to as shy 3 times. And then Dawn is still yet to be referred to. Rude. So that more than doubles our totals across the series. So we've got 12 babyish, 12 bossy, 6 sophisticated, 9 shy. And that's it so far. Only 1 exotic for Claudia. I'm wondering, Anne, do you think I should start tracking beautiful?
It's okay.
Okay. My one social justice thing that I noticed is I have to give credit to Mr. Spear because the one thing that came up that we would not say nowadays is the word retarded. And it is on the list of Richard Spear's words that are normal things that kids say that Marianne is not allowed to say. I don't know what his reasoning is there, but I like it.
I'm also pretty sure he wouldn't allow people to say the F or the N word. Let's give him that,
Inspirational class thing. Maybe. Like an elitist, like no slang, no that kind of thing. Fair enough. It's still not nice to call people retarded, so I'll take it. Sure.
As we find out, Richard grew up with a father as a mailman, and Dawn's parents, who were very wealthy, looked down on him and his family for that. They didn't want their little girl dating a mailman's son. I mean, he was, he probably had to work for what he has now all by himself. And so, of course, he'd probably be that whole bootstraps and, character building kind of person, it worked for him. Why wouldn't it work for Marianne, Even if it meant that, he wouldn't allow her to spend $3 on pizza. Even if it meant like she had to start saving up for college and buying her own clothes. Like, he probably thought, this kind of thing helped me grow. It'll do the same for my daughter. Like, she'll hate me now, but she'll thank me later. Also, I want to say for me so far, the most problematic father was Hamilton Barrett from Dawn and the Impossible 3. Because, what does he do to punish his forgetful ass ex-wife? He plays like he makes his wife think like their son just got kidnapped when really he was taking his son for some fun and games at a theme park. Of course, he does this not knowing there's a babysitter at home, but he does this, of course, to punish his wife for being so darn forgetful and so darn impossible. So darn a mess. Now, that's a lot of danger flags. And of course, where Mrs. Barrett said that the divorce was acrimonious. And I don't see a lot of reference to Barrett being problematic, except, Anna and Martin use that as, a way to inform people, hey, kids don't get kidnapped by strangers. They often get kidnapped more by people that they know, that their family knows. They don't get just snatched up by vans all the time. They get snatched up by people they know, people they trust. That was her PSA. But I didn't see a lot of reference or shade about that. You think the feminist censors would come on. You think all this would come on, Nothing. I think they tend to be harder on Richard Spear and Jamie Newton's girl-hating cousin more. Girl-hating cousin was just a little boy, just a grade schooler. Like, yeah, I wouldn't like being around that kind of kid, but I'm not gonna say he's gonna grow to be some kind of incel. Who knows? Like, maybe he outgrows that phase, becomes like a very supportive feminist ally. Maybe he becomes maybe he rejects gender binary. You can't judge people by how they're gonna on what they're gonna be like when they grow. When they're children. Like, I've seen someone write something about Karen Brewer, how she's an annoying brat in the books who gets away with a lot of stuff, but this person wrote that Karen matured, and she also recognizes her class privilege, and she also her advice for she makes more money than her peers or even her stepsister is Christy now, and the Babysitters Club, and yet she can only afford to live in an apartment with her partner. And her advice for being that financially successful as she is now, she says, don't turn 18 in the year of a recession. That kind of self-deprecating talk. Props. I'll list I'm gonna look for it. I'm gonna list a link for it, below.
Yeah. Okay. What was everyone's favorite line? I wrote down 6. Wow.
I only had one. It was the Shattered Eggman.
Yeah. I had Shattered Eggman also, but I also had, what are you guys, elephants? Don't you forget anything? Claudia says that at the beginning. I had that one as well. Yeah. I also really liked when Marianne and Christy are babysitting the Pikes, and they're trying not to talk to each other, so they just make the Pikes play telephone essentially all meeting. There were 2 things that I cracked up at. This one's very embarrassing, but I cracked up at the Claire, you're a hot dog head telephone chorus. And I also cracked up when they suggest putting on a play, and Christy says, whatever you want, and then all the kids start yelling, and both Adam and Jordan yell Chuck Norris at the same time. Oh, yeah. Like, what is Chuck Norris to play? And I want to see it. Okay, and then I also really liked when Dawn and Marianne are looking through the yearbook, and they're reading, all the seniors' stuff below their photos, and Dawn says, he spelled all right, all wrong. I continue to think that Anna Martin, plays out her grammar peccadillos through multiple characters in the Babysitters Club, from Janine asking where the apostrophe should be or if there should apostrophe to things like he spelled all right, all wrong. I feel like those are all totally her, and she just assigns them to different characters. Did you have another one, Anne?
Yeah, so it's in the beginning of the book when Marianne is talking about Stacy's outfit, and she says, I'd like to create a sensation.
Ooh, that's a really good one to represent this book, though. I feel like I'd like to create a sensation. Wait, I have one more. Okay, so on page 165, when they're interviewing Dawn to see whether she can join the Babysitters Club, Christy asks if she's ever had an emergency babysitting, and then Dawn tells a story about how there was a fire, and she got the kids out and called the fire department, and then DC says, that was a pretty good emergency, looking hopefully at Christy. I thought that was a really funny sentence. This is so funny. I just thought that was the sweetest. I loved Stacy as the second newest member, being helpful and trying to push Dawn along. I just thought that was really it was a nice portrayal of a 12-year-old reaching out. That didn't strike me as funny at all. That's so funny. All right, what's our weirdest
line?
I gotta go with Shattered Eggman. I think it's I like what I'd like to create a sensation says. I feel like that's the subtitle of Marianne Saves the Day, but I really do like Shattered Eggman. I agree. Great. What are we gonna pizza toast today? You guys. Can we pizza toast to the urgence of the pizza toast? Oh, it's the first book we've seen it, right? I feel like this is a good opportunity to explain the pizza toast as well.
I was talking about how Stacy toast with the hamburger.
Right. Just a patty, though. Yeah, they say something like offhand about how Stacy can't eat the processed cheese on pizza. And fair, I remember 1980.
That whole pizza toast thing reminds me of Abuela by Jenny Lorenzo, who's a YouTube comedian, and you should look her up. And Abuela always is known for saying, "La pizza no está comida," until this one episode, which, well, Jenny's sponsored by DiGiorno. Got to make that money. And Abuela is a Cuban American grandmother. She was an immigrant from Cuba. The joke is that some Latino people overfeed their kids. They also are skeptical about different, meals they're not familiar with, like pizza. And what they mean when they call something no está comida, it's not food, it's doesn't have substantial nutrients, it's not nourishing, And I always joke, if Better Like or We Are Me Too ever did a video, like if the Babysitters Club had like a Latina character, like someone whose parents or grandparents were immigrants, like she wouldn't be able to go babysit unless her family knew the family for a long time. She would be she would be giving a lot of side eye to Marianne when she complains about how strict her dad is, because she don't know strict. She don't know strict like I do. Like I said, he lets her go to Sea City with another family. She wouldn't be able to go to sleepovers because, as Jenny Lorenzo jokes, as many others joke, no Latina mother lets her child go to a sleepover or holds a sleepover. This house is not a hotel. Or why would you sleep over at someone else's house? You have a bed here. That's more out of concern for safety and all. I do think sleepovers are beneficial, and if you're not sure about the parents, I always suggest invite them for a outing or get together, like meet at a park, meet at a picnic, do a play date. Invite them to a party, get to know them. You don't have to say yes right away. Just build up that trust, figure them out. Also, that poor Latina babysitter wouldn't be able to enjoy pizza toast because she'd be overstuffed because her family doesn't think of pizza as real food.
Pizzerias. It was not like fresh mozzarella, it was cheese food. It was not necessarily real cheese in a lot of places. Although in Connecticut, it's close to New York, it might have been real cheese. But then the substitute that Marianne gets for the party is a hamburger patty. I don't know.
It's gross.
It's weird.
Okay, so I'm going to read it. Marianne says, this is the last paragraph or last page of the book. Marianne says, I was glad I had the Babysitters Club, the 5-member, italicized, Babysitters Club, to help keep my mind off on Saturday night. I took a piece of pizza and held it in the air. Pizza toast, I cried. Christy, Claudia, and Dawn raised their pizza too, and Stacy raised her hamburger. Dad didn't know what was going on. To our new member, I said. To our new member, said Christy, Stacy, and Claudia. To me, said Dawn. Thanks for letting me join the club.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. I think you're right, Emily. Anne, any objections?
No, let's do it.
All right. So, pizza toast to pizza toasts.
To pizza toast. Toast. This episode of Stuck in Stoneybrook is now adjourned. Thank you to Anna Martin for everything. Stuck in Stoneybrook is edited by Emily Crandall. Theme song written and recorded by Gary Schauner, performed by the band P-Kid. You can follow us.
And that's that. So my thing is, most parents are working within their own context, and I really hope they invite me, or maybe they'll never invite me because of this critical review. But I had to give my piece. I had to say my piece. I had to say it to someone and not just vent to somebody else. So, thank you for listening, and I hope they don't take too negative towards it. Bye. Bye. I think this looks better.